My daughter-in-law smiled when I mentioned divorce, not surprised. Not confused, she smiled like someone who had already planned the ending. I smiled back. What I did next, they never saw coming. I'm glad you're here, stay with me until the end. And tell me where you're watching from. I've learned that betrayal doesn't care about distance. The afternoon light stretched across my dining room table, catching the edges of the china I had set out of habit. At 68, routine becomes something you hold onto, even when everything else begins to slip. The house was quiet, too quiet. Damon used to come home at 5. For over 40 years, I could count on that. The sound of his car in the driveway. The way he loosened his tie before stepping inside. Small things. Predictable things. Now, nothing was predictable. Late nights became normal, phone calls moved outside, conversations became shorter, thinner. At first, I told myself it was age, stress, life shifting in ways we couldn't control. But then, there was her. Ember. My daughter-in-law. She had always been polished, confident, the kind of woman who knew exactly how she was being perceived, and made sure it worked in her favor. I used to admire that. Until I started noticing where she stood in a room. Closer to Damon than she needed to be, laughing a little too softly at things that weren't that funny, lingering when everyone else had already left. Small things. The kind that don't prove anything, but stay with you. 2 nights before that dinner, I walked past Damon's study. The door wasn't fully closed. I heard her voice. Low, familiar, too comfortable. I'll see you tomorrow, she said. There was a pause, then a quiet laugh. I didn't open the door. I didn't say a word. I just kept walking. Because something inside me had already begun to understand. So that night at dinner, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse anyone. I simply set my fork down and said, I think it's time we talk about divorce. Damon looked up, Wade frowned. And Ember? She smiled. Like she had already won. That was the moment everything became clear. They thought I didn't see it, they thought I was too old to notice, too quiet to act. I looked at her, and I smiled back. Because they had no idea. I wasn't giving up. I was just getting started. The next morning felt quieter than usual. Not peaceful, just still. I woke up before sunrise. The way I always did. The house was dark, and for a moment, I lay there listening, to the silence, to my own breathing, to the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Damon wasn't in bed. That used to mean something, now. It just confirmed what I already knew. I made coffee and stood by the kitchen window, watching the sky turn from gray to pale blue. The backyard looked the same. The fence Damon built 15 years ago. The oak tree Wade used to climb as a boy. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. When Damon finally walked in, he didn't look surprised to see me. He just nodded. You're up early. I always am, I said. He poured himself coffee, standing across from me like we were two strangers sharing the same space. No mention of what I had said the night before, no questions, no concern. That told me more than any confession ever could. Ember came in a few minutes later. Perfect as always. Hair done, makeup light but precise. She moved through my kitchen like she belonged there, like she had already claimed her place. Good morning, she said, smiling at me. I nodded once. Morning. She glanced at Damon, just for a second. It was quick, easy to miss. But I didn't miss it. Wade didn't come down. He had been distant for months. Always busy, always distracted. I used to think it was work. Now I wasn't so sure. I thought about what you said. Damon finally spoke, stirring his coffee without looking at me. About the divorce. I turned slightly, just enough to face him. And? He shrugged. If that's what you want, we can make it simple. Simple. 42 years, a house, a life built piece by piece. Reduced to something simple. Ember didn't say anything. But I could feel her listening. Waiting. I agree, I said calmly. That got his attention. He looked up, just briefly. Good, he said, that makes things easier. Easier for who, he didn't say. I picked up my cup and took a small sip of coffee. Still warm, still familiar. Everything else wasn't. I'll need some time to review everything, I added. Of course, Damon replied quickly, almost too quickly. Ember finally spoke, her voice soft. "There's no rush," she said. "We all just want what's best for everyone." For everyone. I almost smiled. Because for the first time since this started, I understood the shape of their plan. They weren't hiding anymore. They thought I had already accepted it. That I would sign whatever was put in front of me, walk away, quietly disappear from a life I had built. I set my cup down gently. "I'll take care of it," I said. And I meant it. Just not in the way they expected. Later that morning, after they had both left the house, I sat alone at the kitchen table. Same chair, same view. But I wasn't the same woman who had sat there the week before. I reached for my phone. There was only one person I needed to call. Not family. Not anyone in this house. Someone who understood paperwork, contracts, consequences. When she answered, I didn't waste time. "Patricia," I said, my voice steady. "I'm ready." There was a pause on the other end. Then, calmly, she replied, "Good, bring everything you have." I looked around the kitchen one more time. At the walls, the table, the life I had spent decades building. They thought I was about to walk away from it. They thought I didn't know what I was doing. They were wrong. I wasn't preparing to leave. I was preparing to understand exactly what belonged to me. Patricia's office was on the third floor of a quiet building downtown. Nothing flashy, no large signs, just a small brass nameplate beside the door. I liked that. People who didn't need attention usually knew exactly what they were doing. She greeted me with a firm handshake. No pity, no unnecessary questions. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. I placed my folder down carefully. It wasn't thick, just a few documents I had gathered over the years, bank statements, property records, a copy of the original house deed. Things I had kept out of habit. Now, they mattered. "So," Patricia said, opening the folder, "tell me everything, slowly." I nodded. And I did. Not emotionally, not dramatically. Just facts. The late nights, the distance, the conversation about divorce, the way my daughter-in-law smiled. Patricia didn't interrupt. She just listened, and occasionally made a note. When I finished, she leaned back slightly. "You suspect an affair," she said. "I don't need to prove that right now," I replied. "I need to understand what they think they're doing." That made her look at me differently. Not as a client. As someone who was already thinking ahead. "All right," she said, "then let's start with what actually matters." She pulled out the deed to the house. "Whose name is on this?" "Both of ours," I said, "since the beginning." She nodded, scanning the page. "And the accounts?" "Mostly joint, some in his name, a few in mine." I watched her carefully. "Is that a problem?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for another document, one I hadn't looked at in years. "A trust agreement. Do you remember signing this?" she asked. I leaned forward slightly. "Yes," Damon insisted, "said it was for tax purposes." "That's what people usually say," Patricia replied calmly. She turned the page toward me. "Look here." I read it once. Then again. Slower. Line by line. Something shifted in my chest. Not panic. Not fear. Something clearer than that. "This means," I started. "It means," Patricia said, finishing the sentence for me, "that a large portion of your shared assets aren't controlled the way your husband might think they are." I looked up at her. "Explain." She folded her hands on the desk. "Under this structure, certain decisions, transfers, sales, distributions, require authorization from the primary beneficiary." "And that is?" She met my eyes directly. "You." The room felt very quiet. Not heavy. Not tense. Just still. "For years," she continued, "this has been sitting in place. Untouched." I sat back slowly. Thinking. Not about what I had lost. But about what I still had. "They think I'll just sign and walk away," I said. Patricia gave a small, knowing nod. That would be the simplest outcome for them. I closed the folder gently. "Good," I said. Because for the first time since all of this began, something made sense. Not their behavior. Not their plan. But their mistake. They believed I was uninformed. That I didn't understand the paperwork. That I would trust whatever was placed in front of me. I stood up, holding the folder firmly in my hands. "I don't want to rush anything," I said. Patricia smiled faintly. "You shouldn't." As I walked toward the door, she added one more thing. "Take your time, watch what they do next." I paused for a second. Then nodded. Because that was exactly what I intended to do. When I stepped back outside, the air felt different. Cooler. Sharper. They thought I was preparing to leave. They thought this was the end. But now, I knew something they didn't. I wasn't the one losing control. They were. When I got back home, the house looked exactly the same. Same driveway, same front door, same quiet that had started to feel different. But I didn't walk in the same way. Before, I used to step inside like I belonged there without question. Now, I stepped in like I was observing something. Not my home. A situation. Damon's car was already in the driveway. That was new. He used to stay out late, now he was home early. Adjusting. Preparing. I placed my purse down on the hallway table and walked into the kitchen. He was there, leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when he heard me. "You were out," he said. Not a question. "I had something to take care of," I replied. He nodded, like that answer was enough. Like he didn't need to ask anything else. That told me something too. "Did you talk to anyone?" he asked after a moment. I looked at him, just briefly. Yes. He didn't ask who. He didn't ask what was said. He just nodded again. That was when I understood something very clearly. He wasn't trying to fix anything. He was trying to move forward. Without me. Ember walked in a few minutes later. Same composed expression, same quiet confidence. She glanced between us, reading the room faster than most people could. "Everything okay?" she asked. Her tone was soft. Careful. "Yes," I said. And that was the truth. For the first time in weeks. Everything was becoming very clear. She smiled. That same smile. Controlled, certain. I watched her for a second. Not with anger. Not with resentment. Just attention. "Have you made any decisions?" she asked gently. Not directly to Damon. To me. I shook my head slightly. Not yet. Her eyes didn't change. But something in her posture relaxed. Just a little. That was enough. They thought I was hesitating. That I needed time to accept things. That I was slowly adjusting to the idea of leaving. They were wrong. "I'll need to go through everything carefully," I added. "Of course," Damon said quickly. "Take all the time you need." Time. That word again. They kept offering it like it was something they were giving me. I nodded. "I will." That evening, I stayed quiet. I moved through the house the same way I always had. Prepared dinner, cleared the table, turned off the lights one by one. Routine. Familiar. But inside, everything had shifted. After they went to bed, I didn't. I sat alone in the living room with the folder Patricia had reviewed. I opened it again. Slowly. The trust document. The signatures. The clauses I had never paid attention to before. I read every line. Carefully. No rushing. No assumptions. Certain words stood out now. Primary authority. Beneficiary control. Conditional access. I didn't need to understand everything at once. I just needed to understand enough. Enough to know this. They believed control was already in their hands. I closed the folder gently, resting my hand on top of it for a moment. For years, I had trusted Damon to handle these things. Finances, documents, decisions. I never questioned it. Because I believed we were on the same side. Now, I wasn't so sure he even knew what side he was on. But I knew mine. I stood up, turned off the last lamp, and looked around the room. At the furniture we chose together, the photos on the wall, the life that had been built piece by piece. They thought I was preparing to walk away from all of this. I wasn't. I was learning how it all worked. Quietly. Carefully. Because the next move wouldn't be emotional. It wouldn't be loud. It would be precise. And when it happened, they wouldn't have time to smile. The next day, they brought it up again. Not directly, not all at once. Just pieces. It started at breakfast. Damon sat across from me. Unusually attentive, his phone stayed face down on the table. That alone was different. "We should probably start organizing things," he said. His tone was calm, practical. Like he was discussing a home renovation. I buttered my toast slowly. "What kind of things?" I asked. He glanced at Ember before answering. "Accounts, the house, legal paperwork." Simple words. Carefully chosen. Ember added, "It's better to make everything clear early, so there's no confusion later." Her voice was soft. Measured. But there was something underneath it. Expectation. I nodded once. That makes sense. They relaxed. Not visibly. But I could feel it. That was the moment I understood something important. They weren't testing me anymore. They were guiding me. Trying to move me, step by step, toward a decision they had already made. Later that afternoon, Damon placed a folder on the dining table. Neat, organized, prepared. "I spoke to someone this morning," he said, "a lawyer. Just to understand the process." Of course he had. I sat down across from him and opened the folder. Inside were documents. Draft agreements, property outlines, account summaries. All laid out in a way that looked reasonable. I kept it simple, he added. Simple. That word again. I turned a page. Then another. Reading carefully. Not reacting. The house. Listed under shared ownership, but with a proposed transfer. To him. I didn't stop reading. The accounts. Joint, but restructured. Reduced. I kept going. There it was. A section near the end. Conditions. Clauses. Language designed to look neutral, but not balanced. I closed the folder gently. "I'll need time to review this," I said. Damon nodded immediately. "Of course." Ember leaned slightly forward. "It's all pretty standard," she said. "We just want things to be fair." Fair. I looked at her. Just for a second. She held my gaze. Confident. Steady. She really believed this would work. "I understand," I said. And I did. Not what they were offering. But what they were assuming. They thought I wouldn't read closely. That I would trust the presentation. That I would sign, because it felt easier than asking questions. They thought I was still the woman who let Damon handle everything. That woman didn't exist anymore. "I'll go through it tonight," I added. Damon stood up, relieved. "Take your time." Time. Again. After they left the room, I opened the folder once more. Slower this time. More carefully. Each page told me something. Not just about the agreement. But about them. What they wanted, what they expected, what they thought I deserved. And more importantly, what they thought I didn't understand. I reached the last page and rested my hand on it. Still. They had prepared everything. Every detail. Every clause. Every step. Except one thing. They hadn't prepared for me to read it like this. That evening, I didn't confront them. I didn't ask questions. I didn't argue. I simply sat at the table, reading. Line by line. Because now, this wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about precision. And I was starting to see exactly where their plan began to fall apart. That night, I didn't turn on the television. I didn't read, I didn't distract myself. I sat at the dining table with the folder open in front of me, and a notepad beside it. For the first time in years, I wasn't just looking at documents. I was studying them. I started from the beginning. Names, dates, account numbers. Then I moved slower. Clauses, conditions, language that sounded neutral, until you read it twice. There's a certain way legal documents are written. Not to lie. But to guide. To lead your eyes where they want you to look, and away from where it matters. I circled a section near the middle. Primary residence transfer upon agreement. It sounded simple. Until you noticed the timing. Transfer first. Settlement later. I underlined it. Slowly. Then I moved to the account summaries. Balances were listed. But not all of them. Some were missing. Not hidden completely, just not included in the main structure. That was deliberate. I leaned back slightly, looking at the pages spread in front of me. They hadn't rushed this. They had planned it. Carefully. But planning only works if the other person doesn't look too closely. I picked up my phone and called Patricia. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me you've started reading," she said. "I have." I read her the sections I had marked. One by one. No emotion, just facts. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a short pause. Then she said, "You're seeing it." "Yes. They're structuring control," she continued, "not division. Not fairness. Control." That word settled into place. "If I sign this," I asked, "what happens?" "You give up leverage," she said calmly, immediately. I looked back down at the paper. At the signatures waiting at the bottom of the page. "And if I don't?" Another pause. Then they'll have to show their hand." I closed the folder gently. Not in frustration. Not in fear. In clarity. "They think I'll sign," I said. "They usually do," Patricia replied. I almost smiled. "Good," I said. Because now I understood something very clearly. This wasn't just about what they were asking for. It was about what they assumed I didn't know. After I hung up, I didn't reopen the folder. I didn't need to. I stood up and walked through the house slowly. Past the kitchen, past the living room, up the stairs. Every step felt different. Not heavier. More certain. Damon's office door was closed. A thin line of light showed underneath. He was inside. Working, or pretending to. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. For years, I had trusted him to make decisions for both of us. Financial ones, legal ones, practical ones. Now I knew something he didn't. He wasn't in control anymore. I went back downstairs and turned off the lights. One by one. When I reached the dining room, I paused. The folder was still there. Neatly placed. Waiting. They thought it was the next step. They were wrong. It was just the first mistake. And I hadn't even responded yet. The next 2 days, I didn't mention the documents. Not once. I moved through the house the same way I always had: breakfast at 7, dishes cleaned before 8, laundry folded by noon. Routine. Predictable. But I was watching. Damon started checking his phone more often when I was in the room. Not openly. Just quick glances, short messages, subtle shifts in his posture. Ember changed too. She became attentive. Not warm, not kind. Just aware. "Did you get a chance to look at everything?" she asked casually that afternoon. Standing by the kitchen island. I didn't look up from the sink. I did. A pause. Not long. Just enough. "And?" she asked. I dried my hands slowly. Turned around. Looked at her. "I'm still going through it," I said. She nodded. Smiled. But it wasn't the same smile. There was a question behind it now. Good. That meant something had shifted. Not in the documents. In her expectations. That evening, Wade finally joined us for dinner. He sat quietly, pushing food around his plate more than eating it. He avoided looking at me. That used to hurt. Now, it told me something. He knew. Maybe not everything. But enough. Halfway through the meal, Damon spoke again. "We should probably set a timeline," he said. "Just so things don't drag out." Timeline. I set my fork down. "Why?" I asked calmly. He hesitated. Just for a second. "So we can move forward," he said. "Move forward." I nodded once. "That makes sense." Ember relaxed again. Just a little. They thought they were guiding the pace. Controlling the direction. They didn't realize I was letting them. "I'll need a few more days," I added. "To be thorough." Damon agreed quickly. Of course. Too quickly. That was when I saw it clearly. They were starting to get uncomfortable. Not because I refused. But because I hadn't agreed. After dinner, I stayed in the kitchen while they moved to the living room. Their voices were low. But not low enough. "You said she'd sign," Ember whispered. "I said she would," Damon replied. "She just needs time." "Time." Again. "I don't like this," Ember said. "She's too calm." I almost smiled. Because that was the first honest thing she had said. Calm makes people uncomfortable. Especially when they expect resistance. Or weakness. "She doesn't understand the documents," Damon said. "She never cared about that stuff." I stood very still. Listening. That was his mistake. Not the affair. Not the lies. The assumption. That I hadn't been paying attention. I turned off the kitchen light and walked upstairs quietly. They thought I didn't understand. That I wasn't aware of what they were doing. But now, I understood something even more important. They were starting to doubt their own plan. And doubt was where everything began to break. The next morning, I didn't wait. I didn't sit with the documents again. I didn't reread anything. I already knew enough. Instead, I got dressed earlier than usual. Simple clothes, neutral colors, nothing that drew attention. I tied my hair back, picked up my purse, and left the house without saying a word. Damon was still asleep. Ember's car was gone. That told me everything I needed to know about where she was, and why. The bank was only a 15-minute drive. I had been there dozens of times over the years, but never like this. When I walked in, everything felt sharper. The sound of footsteps on tile, the quiet conversations behind glass partitions, the way people avoided eye contact. I approached the front desk. "I need to review my accounts," I said. The woman smiled politely. "Of course. Do you have identification?" I handed it over. "Steady." A few minutes later, I was sitting in a private office. A man in his 40s introduced himself as Daniel. Professional, calm, efficient. "What can I help you with today?" he asked. I placed my hands on the desk. "I'd like a full overview," I said, "all accounts connected to my name, joint or otherwise." He nodded and began typing. No hesitation. The screen reflected faintly in his glasses as he worked. I watched. Not impatient. Just attentive. After a moment, he turned the monitor slightly toward me. "These are your primary accounts," he said. I recognized most of them. Checking, savings, a few investment accounts. But not all. "What about anything linked through a trust?" I asked. He paused. Just slightly. Then continued typing. Another screen appeared. Different layout. Different numbers. Larger numbers. "These accounts are under a trust structure," he explained. "They're not typically accessed directly." "Who has authority?" I asked. He looked at the screen again. Then back at me. "You do," he said. The room didn't feel different. But something inside me settled. "For transactions?" I asked. "For any major changes," he replied. "Transfers, closures, restructuring, those would require your authorization." I nodded slowly. "And if someone else tried to make changes?" "They wouldn't be able to," he said simply. I sat back in the chair. Not surprised. Just confirmed. They had built their plan around movement. Transfers, reassignments, control. But control wasn't where they thought it was. "Can I request a detailed statement?" I asked. "Of course." He printed several pages and handed them to me. I didn't rush through them. I didn't react. I just looked. Line by line. Account by account. Everything was there. Everything they hadn't mentioned. I placed the papers neatly back on the desk. "I'd also like to make a note on these accounts," I said. He nodded. "What kind of note?" "That any major action requires direct confirmation from me." He gave a small, understanding look. "Already in place," he said. Of course it was. I stood up, gathering the documents. "Is there anything else?" he asked. I paused for a moment. Then shook my head. "No, that's all I needed." And it was. When I walked back outside, the air felt cooler. Clearer. They thought they were moving ahead. Preparing the next step. Waiting for me to follow. But now, I knew something they didn't. They weren't ahead of me. They were standing on ground they didn't even realize could disappear. When I got home, nothing had changed. The same quiet house, the same furniture, the same routine waiting to be followed. But I didn't walk in the same way. I placed my purse down and set the bank documents neatly on the dining table. Not hidden. Not exposed. Just there. Damon was in the living room. Television on, volume low. He looked up when he heard me. "You were out again," he said. "Yes." He studied me for a moment. Not suspicious. Just curious. "Everything all right?" he asked. I nodded once. Everything's becoming very clear. That seemed to satisfy him. Or maybe, he chose not to ask more. Ember came in shortly after. She noticed the papers immediately. Her eyes moved to the table, then back to me. "Quick. Careful. More paperwork?" she asked lightly. I glanced at the documents. Then back at her. "Yes." She smiled. But this time, it didn't hold as long. "Good. I was thinking," Damon said, shifting forward in his seat. "We should meet with the lawyer soon." Soon. I took off my coat slowly. "That makes sense." Ember stepped closer. "There's no reason to delay things," she added. "The sooner everything is settled, the easier it will be." Easier. I looked at both of them. Calm, steady. "Let's schedule it," I said. That changed the room. Not dramatically. Just enough. Relief. Damon nodded. "I'll call this afternoon." Ember didn't speak. But I could see it. That quiet certainty returning. They thought this was the moment. The point where everything moved forward. They didn't realize. This was the moment I needed. That evening, I sat at the table again. The bank documents on one side. Their agreement on the other. I didn't rush. I didn't compare everything at once. I moved slowly. Account names. Numbers. Structures. What they listed. What they left out. Each difference was small. But together, they told a complete story. Not of mistake. Of intention. I reached the final page again. The signature line. Still blank. I placed my pen beside it. Not touching the paper. Just close enough. From the hallway, I could hear their voices. Low, controlled. "Tomorrow works," Damon said. "Good," Ember replied. "She won't drag this out forever." I didn't move. That was the second mistake. They thought time was on their side. That pressure would push me forward. They didn't understand something simple. I wasn't delaying. I was aligning everything. The documents. The accounts. The assumptions. All of it. I closed the folder gently. Tomorrow, we would sit in a room together. With a lawyer. With papers. With expectations. They thought it would be the end. But for me, it was the first time everything would be said out loud. And this time, I wouldn't just be listening. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Not for appearance. For clarity. A simple navy dress. Low heels. No jewelry except my wedding ring. I looked at it for a moment before leaving. Then I walked out without taking it off. Damon drove. I sat in the passenger seat, hands resting quietly in my lap. Ember sat in the back. No one spoke. The lawyer's office was modern. Clean lines, glass walls, everything designed to feel neutral. Professional. Detached. We were led into a conference room. A long table, 4 chairs, a stack of documents already waiting. Damon sat across from me. Ember beside him. I took the seat nearest the window. The lawyer introduced himself, polite, efficient. He began explaining the process. Division of assets, transfer of property, final agreements. I listened. Not interrupting. Not reacting. Every word sounded reasonable. Carefully structured. Balanced, on the surface. Then the documents were placed in front of me. "This reflects what we discussed," Damon said. I opened the folder slowly. Not because I needed time. Because I wanted them to watch. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. I didn't rush. Silence stretched across the room. Ember shifted slightly in her seat. Damon leaned forward. Waiting. When I reached the section about the house, I paused. Just long enough. Then I looked up. "Can you explain this part?" I asked the lawyer. He adjusted his glasses. "This outlines the transfer of the primary residence under mutual agreement." "Mutual," I repeated. "Yes." I nodded slowly. Then turned the page. "And this?" I asked, tapping lightly on the account summary. Damon answered this time. "It's just simplifying things, making sure everything is easy to manage." "Easy?" I looked at him. Really looked. "For who?" I asked. A small silence. "For both of us," he said. I didn't respond. Instead, I reached into my bag and placed a second set of documents on the table. Not dramatically. Not forcefully. Just, there. "What are those?" Ember asked. I met her eyes. "Calm. Information," I said. The lawyer glanced between us. "Would you like me to review those as well?" "Yes," I replied. I slid the papers toward him. The bank statements. The trust structure. The details they had left out. He began reading. Slowly. More carefully than before. The room changed. Not loudly. But noticeably. Damon leaned back slightly. Ember didn't move. A few seconds passed. Then a minute. The lawyer looked up. "These accounts," he began carefully, "are not reflected in the current agreement." I nodded. I noticed. Another silence. "And under this structure," he continued, flipping a page, "authorization would require." He stopped. Looked directly at me. "You." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Across the table, Damon's expression shifted. Not dramatically. But enough. Ember's smile disappeared. For the first time since this began. They weren't certain anymore. I folded my hands neatly in front of me. "I have a few questions," I said calmly. And this time, I wasn't asking to understand. I was asking. So they would. The lawyer adjusted the papers again. Slower this time. More careful. "These accounts change the structure of the agreement," he said. Not to me. To Damon. Damon didn't answer immediately. He was looking at the documents like he was seeing them for the first time. Maybe he was. "That's not what we discussed," he said finally. I tilted my head slightly. "No," I replied, "it's what you didn't discuss." Silence. Ember shifted in her chair. "This doesn't have to be complicated," she said, her voice still controlled, but tighter now. "We're just trying to settle things fairly." "Fair." I looked at her. "Calm. Then we should include everything," I said. The lawyer nodded slightly. "That would be appropriate." Damon leaned forward. "There's no need to bring every account into this," he said quickly. "We agreed to keep things simple." Simple. I placed my hand lightly on the trust document. "This is already in place," I said. "Nothing new, nothing added." He didn't respond. Because he couldn't. The lawyer turned another page. "And under this structure," he continued, "any transfer or reallocation would require primary authorization." Another pause. "From her," he added. That was the moment it changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But completely. Ember's posture straightened. Her hands folded tighter in her lap. Damon leaned back slowly. Like the air had shifted and he needed to adjust to it. "I think we should take a step back," he said. I didn't move. "Why?" I asked. Another pause. "So we can reconsider the details," he said. "Reconsider." I nodded once. "That would be wise." Ember looked at him. Then at me. "You knew about this?" she asked. I met her gaze. "I knew enough," I said. That was the truth. She held my eyes for a second longer. Then looked away. The smile was gone now. Completely. The lawyer cleared his throat softly. "We can pause here and reconvene once all parties have reviewed the full financial structure." "No," I said calmly. Everyone looked at me. "We don't need to pause," I continued. "We just need to be accurate." Silence again. For the first time. They weren't guiding the conversation. I was. "I'm not refusing anything," I said. I'm simply making sure everything is understood." Damon nodded slowly. But it wasn't agreement. It was realization. They had built their plan on one assumption. That I wouldn't look closely. That I wouldn't ask questions. That I would sign. That assumption was gone. And without it, their entire structure had nothing to stand on. I closed the folder in front of me. Gently. "We can continue," I said. And this time, they didn't try to lead. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Not tense, not loud. Just still. The lawyer gathered the documents carefully, placing both sets side by side. No longer separating them. No longer favoring one over the other. "I'll revise the agreement," he said, "to reflect the full structure." Damon nodded. Slowly. Like he was trying to adjust to something he hadn't prepared for. Ember didn't speak. She sat very still, her hands folded tightly, her eyes no longer meeting mine. That smile. It was gone. We stood up not long after. No arguments, no raised voices. Just quiet movement. Damon walked ahead of me toward the door. For the first time in weeks, he didn't try to guide me. Outside, the air felt different. Cooler. Clear. We didn't speak during the drive home. There was nothing left to explain. When we arrived, I stepped inside the house first. The same house. The same walls. The same life, but no longer the same balance. I placed my purse down on the table and looked around. At the photographs, at the furniture, at the years that had been built here. For a long time, I believed this place defined me. That my role in this family was something I had to protect quietly. But standing there, I realized something else. I wasn't being removed. I was being tested. And they had failed. Damon came in behind me. He didn't say anything at first. Then, "We'll need to talk," he said. I turned to him. "Calm." "Yes," I replied, "but not today." He nodded. Not in agreement. In understanding. Ember didn't come into the room. I heard her footsteps upstairs. Quick. Uncertain. That told me everything I needed to know. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. Simple. Familiar. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't change. Because this was never about anger. It was about clarity. For weeks, they believed I was the one losing control. That I would walk away quietly. That I didn't understand what was happening around me. But control was never about who spoke the loudest. It was about who understood the situation completely. I set the glass down and looked out the window. The same yard, the same fence. Nothing had changed. Except this time. I knew exactly where I stood. I wasn't leaving. Not blindly. Not quietly. Not on their terms. Whatever came next would be decided with full understanding. Not assumptions. Not pressure. And as for Ember, she smiled when I mentioned divorce because she thought she had already won. She didn't realize. The moment she smiled was the moment she lost.